So if you've been keeping up with the news in the UK, you've seen that the country has been blighted with far-right race riots and mobs. So these started after 3 girls were killed after being stabbed alongside many other children by someone in Stockport. This man was a Rwandan man born in Wales. However, the far right decided this was a reason to start race riots, to start burning mosques, to start attacking random black and brown people in the street, to burn down a library, to burn down a citizen's advice, which is a place where oftentimes working class people go to get help and advice with, just living in general. They decided to desecrate Muslim graves, and this is something that I personally believe was caused by our media, by capitalists trying to make a quick buck, and by our past governments. They all fanned the flames of this hatred and have made it incredibly dangerous for any person of colour in this country. I personally do not like when my parents have to leave the house just in case something happens. And I live in an area where there has been some unrest, but not to the extent of a lot of these places like Birmingham, Burnley, Liverpool, Bristol, so forth. So I don't know how much this is going to help, but I've got 5 books that I'm going to be reading to try and wrap my head around this bigotry. Not justifying it, but understanding where it's coming from and the causes behind it, and what our government, our media, our authorities have failed to do to prevent this hatred, or what they have done to stoke up this hatred. Because I'm angry, I am upset, and I want to just shout and berate at these people, but I also understand that what they are doing is not just them. It is a structure that has caused this. It is layers on layers which have created this hatred for people like me, and something that my father's and my mother's generation went through already, something that I'm sure they wished would never happen to my generation or subsequent generations. But sadly, these incredibly disgusting people and circumstances have created that again. And I won't go more into that because it's not going to be relevant to the video, but maybe I'll talk about it at the end. So I'm going to be talking about these books in no particular order, but the first one I'm going to be talking about is Tomorrow Belongs to Us, the British Far Right since 1967. So this book, released in 2017, it's a slightly more academic book, I think, out of the 5 that I'm going to be reading myself. It is basically tracking the rise of the far right, the different beliefs they had, their different phases since 1967, basically post the World War, when the far right were going through their extreme anti-Semitism phase, when they were going through their extreme anti-South Asian phase, how they have developed since 2010 to 2017. So I don't think it's going to talk a lot about the things that they are claiming they are worried about at the moment. So, the past, 7 years, where we've seen a big ramp up in the anti-asylum seeker hatred, the anti-immigrant hatred in the past 7 years. We've seen since the Tory government, basically since Theresa May, but also probably this book will touch on things like Brexit and the hatred that came out of that. And I think some of Theresa May's anti-immigrant campaign happened in around 2017 or prior to 2017. I think that was 2015 or something. So it's probably going to talk about that. Actually, that's probably about 2017. Because that's after Brexit, which was in 2016. I digress. So it's not really going to super talk about right now the anti-asylum seeker hatred we see right now in Britain, but seeing how the far right has never gone away since World War II. When the far right did have a faction here in the UK in World War II, it's not gone away, how it's gone up and down, and how it's changed and evolved and had different faces and different leaders in the UK. And I think it's going to have that more overall academic look of all of that. This book, I've been trying to find it online myself. It looks like it's very expensive to buy. So, you know, if you're gonna find maybe a PDF version of this book, that might be the best way to get it. I'm gonna have links to the books down below if I can find them, but what I'm looking at the moment, it's quite expensive. The next book is 2012's Bloody Nasty People. This book was pretty popular when it came to being read in 2012. It's basically about the rise and fall of the National Front, the people who are mostly behind things like Paki bashing in the 70s and 80s and their kind of group, and also talking about the EDL, which by what many of its, you know, members say, the EDL isn't a thing anymore. The people who we are seeing running riot and running roughshod right now are the people who are part of the EDL. The EDL was meant to have basically fallen away in around 2009 to 2011, but the people we're seeing, you know, inspiring these hate mongers right now, they are mostly the EDL people, the likes of Tommy, my real name is Stephen Robinson. They were all EDL. They were members of EDL. They were high-ranking officials in the EDL. So I wouldn't say the EDL is gone, but when this book was written was when people were like, okay, there's no more EDL at the moment. But I'm basically, I would call them the NeoEDL, the folks who are running around at the moment trying to murder brown and black people. So this book is, I think it's more of like a popular non-fiction book about it, so maybe a bit less academic than the first book we spoke about, but maybe a little bit more accessible to read. And because it was a very popular book, for lack of a better term, when it was released, I think it will be slightly easier to find, maybe even secondhand, for slightly cheaper than the first book. That's what I'm seeing online. The next book is Europe's Fault Line, so I'm stepping back a little bit more from just Britain to the whole of Europe, where we've seen a rise in the far right, although recently we've maybe seen that being negated, such as France's recent election of a more left-wing government, which is positive, but I don't know if that's just going to be, you know, tape over the cracks of the issues in places like France and the rest of Europe. But this book looks into how racism and race is being used to propagate this brand new rise of the far right in Europe, how it's being used and developed and spun even further and made even more malicious against people of colour, against immigrants in Europe. Not just Europe, I mean, not just the EU, but the whole of Europe, because this includes Britain and the Nordic countries. How that racism is being spun and expanded and become so much more vitriolic, kind of like how we see it playing out in Britain, that this casual racism people will talk about, it's not casual racism, it is the surface of this deep-seated hatred and vitriol that's been spread throughout Britain and Europe as a whole, and about the people who are doing it, and about those who benefit from this hatred and vitriol, and the people who they are using to spread this hatred. Like I said at the beginning of the video, many of these foot soldiers we're seeing on the ground burning the mosques, or trying to burn mosques, burning hotels, burning libraries, attacking black and brown people. They aren't the main evil. They are bad, they are horrible. I personally despise them. But there are the people above them who I hate even more, the people above them who are even more culpable for what is happening. And just to step back to talking about this book talks about how those evil intentions, those evil thoughts have been propagated throughout Europe, and how that deep-seated racism that we all know is there in Europe has been turned even to just more vicious attacks on people of colour. The next book I'm talking about is Angry White People. this book, the author actually interviews Tommy, my real name is Stephen Robinson, and basically analyzes where these people who are the white working class, as they are portrayed, and they themselves call themselves the white working class, who are part of the EDL, and it was praised by some more left-wing commentators for its analysis of understanding the economic circumstances of these people and how politicians and the government have failed these people. However, it does not justify their hatred for immigrants. It does not justify their hatred for people of colour, of non-white people. So it shows you the root cause of it, and it shows you where the outrage from these people is not directed at the correct villains in their eyes. They will direct their anger at people like me instead of directing their anger at the people who are running the corporations, who are running the government, who are paid by people who run corporations, who are happy to keep these people as potentially an underclass whilst enriching themselves, and instead of allowing them to direct their ire at these capitalists, they're like, hey, look, those immigrants are the real problem, not us. It does interview Tommy, my real name is Stephen Robinson, and again, disgusting human being, absolute dregs of the earth, horrible human. But it interviews him, but it also interviews other members of the ADL, but it interviews people on the other side. It interviews anti-fascists. So it was praised by certain left-wing commentators for, you know, its, I wouldn't call it balance, but it's, you know, way of presenting their ideology without supporting the ideology. And there were like racists who didn't like the book because, you know, they said, oh, you know, it paints us in a bad light. You know, we might be racist. We might, you know, be the ones forcing, or not forcing, but convincing these EDL white working class people to hate brown people. But, you know, don't say that. That's rude. So I'll read it. I don't know if it's going to be one I'll enjoy very much, but I was trying to find one that was a little bit more like that and by an Asian author as well. So that was kind of where I got that book from. And the final book is The Rise of the Right. This book is similar to the previous book, but it's not interviewing people per se, but it is talking about how this white working class is disenfranchised and how instead of going over or after their true enemy, the people who have put them in this position, they have been directing their ire towards immigrants and people of colour. So it is more of a general look at that. This again might be one of those more introductory books out of all of them, kind of like the second book I spoke about. So I think that's why I thought of getting this book as well. But I don't think it's going to be the most deep dive. I think that first book will be the most deep dive. I think this will be a little bit more general, but I think also quite an interesting read. It might be a bit repetitive when paired with the other books, but I think maybe it's a good introduction to the topic, The Rise of the Right. So I'm going to waffle a bit now, so if you want to click off the video, do remember to like, subscribe, share the video. You know, thank you for watching, but I'm going to waffle a little bit now, so do bear with me whilst I talk about my feelings and also try and relate it to books if I can. I have been grappling with feelings of anger, frustration, sadness, glimmers of hope through the cracks, and just anger again. And I think I've made it very clear my views and my stances and my politics on this channel. I mean, I read Huey Newton here. I've read multiple books about Malcolm X, about the Black Panthers. I've said in the past, as a child, I idolized Malcolm X and the Black Panthers. Very weird, a brown boy from Southeast England looking up to these civil rights movement activists when he was like 10. Yes, but I read them And there's that part of me who's like, I agree when Malcolm X says along the lines of, if you want to get rid of the gun, sometimes you must pick it up. And I agree with Huey Newton's talking about how we must defend ourselves against our oppressors. But then I also have loved ones reach out to me and just ask me, be gentle, don't be angry, or channel that anger differently. I look at how the likes of Martin Luther King, another man I looked up to again as a young boy, or I look at people like Arundhati Roy, who talks about the movements of trying to fight against oppressors in India and the Indian subcontinent. I look at my books about, down here, about, you know, the Indian Mutiny of 1857. I look at my books of Frantz Fanon. I look at my selected works of Ho Chi Minh, and I just try to understand my feelings and what I want to do, because I think the reason I want to read these 5 books is so I can get a glimpse into these people. Like the vitriol they have sent my way, if you look at my politics channel, which you should go subscribe to as well, just the disgusting vitriol I have received on there for talking about this, the absolutely horrendous things I've seen people write online, and it's just, I can't wrap my head around that hatred, even though I'm reading these books and I know what they're going to say, I know, but I want to read them anyway. And yet this utter disgusting hatred they have for me is making me hate them. And there's that don't stoop to their level, but also why should they be allowed to be at that level and I have to be better than them? Why do people of colour always have to be the better people? Why do we always have to be the ones who have to turn the other cheek when they attack us? When these people were attacking my father and mother's generation in the 80s, some people told them the same thing. Turn the other cheek, be better than them. And then there were some people who were young, oftentimes, who were like, no, I'm going to fight back. Why should I allow them to kill my friend on the street for being sick? Why should I allow them to attack people on the street because they are brown? Why should I allow them to come here and say, Paki, go home, like that girl in Belfast was saying, skipping next to her mum the other day? Why should I allow them to profile who is allowed to drive across the street like they were doing to people in Middlesbrough based on their colour? Why? Why should I turn the other cheek? Why should I forgive these people? Because I get that the ones doing this are not the root cause of this. I understand they oftentimes aren't the ones who have caused this hatred, but they are enacting it. And to fight against our oppressors, can we also fight their foot soldiers like these people are? And I just want to wrap my head around it, because I can read as much as I want. I can talk to my parents or people who my parents know, or my parents who experienced this kind of hatred in the 80s. But I need to find what I believe. And don't let me colour your thoughts of this in the description, in the comments, but I'm trying to process these emotions whilst also trying to do something positive. Whilst also hoping, I don't know, suggesting these books to you changes something. Whilst, I don't know, going to the counter protests will do something. Talking to my local Asian community will do something positive whilst I grapple with this anger and frustration. They are close to achieving their goal of making me not want to be here. Their goal is to get rid of me. Their goal is to scare me into leaving, or to frustrate me into leaving, and they are close to achieving that goal. but I don't want to let them, and it's difficult to grapple with. So with all of that said, those are the 5 books I recommend. I will put links to them in the description if I can, hopefully to bookshop.org. If not, I'll put the ISBNs for you to be able to find them either secondhand or maybe a PDF version if they are expensive. Yeah, my comment outro, like, subscribe, share the video with a friend or family member. Try and read a great and informative book today, and stay safe out there, especially if you're in any of the areas where these riotous mob is operating.